Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm here today with my brother Pejman. How are you doing, Pejman?
I'm doing really good. It's good to be here today.
Yes, well, thank you so much for coming on. You are an amazing substance counselor and interventionist. I definitely wanted to have you come back to share your story with people because you've been through so much, and where you are now is really a story of redemption. So, would you mind sharing with us a little bit about your story?
Okay, so it's good to be back. My story has so many different variables, but I will start by saying that in June I will be 18 years sober from all mood and mind altering substances. I was very addicted to many different types of substances. First and foremost, I am Iranian, Persian. I was born in Germany, and I have only been to Iran for a few months when I was super young, probably around 4.5 years old. But we moved to America, the land of opportunity, when I was 5. So I started going to school in Salt Lake City, Utah, of all places. It was kind of, being part of a Persian Muslim family, growing up in a very Mormon, American area, and also this was in the mid 70s. So there were people that were very friendly to us, and there were some people that weren't so friendly. They didn't really know what to make of us, and we didn't really know what to make of them. But growing up in Utah was interesting. I became educated in the school system in America at a very young age, obviously kindergarten and up. I learned English within school and spoke Farsi within the house. My first language was German, but that went out the window because I was growing up here in America. And so growing up was what we had a very interesting family dynamic. My father was a good man. He provided for his family. My mother was a good woman. She provided for her family. They were hard workers. They worked a lot. Humble beginnings. I remember my dad, uh, he was very happy when he was happy, but he also had a short fuse and a big temper. And when he was angry, you knew it. And so a lot of times within the house, we would hear yelling, and sometimes he was even physically abusive. And I don't think that he really meant to be that way, because he was also the type of person that if he became physical, he later became remorseful. And I always felt different. I felt different than people around me in school because they looked different. A lot of them were blonde haired, blue eyed American kids. The majority of them were American. And there wasn't many people that looked like me in our local area. So I did a lot of trying to fit in, a lot of chameleon work, if you will, trying to just blend in with whoever was around me. Um, and like I became educated to a certain extent. I like to read. I like to um, explore and do a lot of different things. Growing up in Utah, there was a lot of nature that was surrounding us, so I would do a lot of that too. But I still felt different, and by feeling different, I started seeking things that were going to make me feel good. My uncles smoked cigarettes, and when they would smoke cigarettes, I would ask them, "Why do you do that?" And they'd say, "Well, don't do it when you grow up. It's not good for you." And you tell a curious child don't do something, and I'm already a bit of a introvert, so I'm going to go and do things privately and secretly. And so sometimes I would take their cigarettes without them knowing it, and I would start attempting to smoke them. And um and so like my addictive behaviors started at a very young age. My dad also would drink alcohol on the weekends. He wasn't an alcoholic, I wouldn't say, because he was just drinking with his friends on the weekends, and it wasn't like an everyday thing for him. But when he would drink, sometimes I think he found it amusing when his 8 or 9 year old kid, which would be me, would take sips off of his cognac or maybe like some of his beer. But it wasn't a lot. It was just enough to give me a little head change. And I think that he found it amusing and funny that his kid was, kind of in good spirits, if you will. But my introduction to like substance use was at 12, like real substance use. And when I say that, I mean more regularly. By the time I was 12 years old, I went to a Persian wedding. There was a lot of alcohol there. I got my hands on it, and I ended up drinking it, and I got very drunk. So that was then. And then there was also marijuana use, there was certain outcasts, other kids, just a few of us that felt different also. So we kind of just congregated together, came together, and we started to experiment. And so I don't remember how we obtained the marijuana, but we did. And so we would go hide out behind our school. There was a Mormon church, and so behind that church there was like an area where no one could find us. And I remember experimenting with marijuana that same year when I was 12 years old. And then on top of that, I started huffing gasoline. And the way the idea of that came was people were sniffing glue. Just a couple of people were sniffing glue in class, and we would try to sniff the fumes to get high. Why we were doing this was to get out of right here, right now. I wasn't comfortable in my skin, so I was trying to seek things that are going to make me feel better. And so the glue wasn't really giving me the results I wanted. Somehow I caught wind of gasoline. It's not normal for a 12-year-old to go and put gasoline fumes towards his nose, but that's what I was doing. I was mowing lawns one summer, and I would resort back to this shed and start huffing gasoline. And I remember doing enough of it to where it got me really, really high. I mean, to the point where I would be out of my mind, and it was weird because I would go in these pattern like states in my head, and I almost felt like within a few instances that I had all the answers to the world. But but I also kind of had this guilty conscience within myself, like if my mom finds out about this is bad. Like I shouldn't be doing this, so she can't find out, right? Like I because I like doing this because it's making me feel good. It gets me out of right here, right now, and so I was seeking to gain spirit through substance, right? So between getting drunk at that Persian wedding, between smoking weed with the kids behind the school, and between smoking or huffing gasoline during that time, I was starting to kind of, get results from substance, right? Now, it wasn't like it was an everyday thing, but it was definitely something that I was doing quite regularly, like, at least every few days. And then my mom, you know, well, let me back up. There was a time also where we moved out of one part of Utah to a different part. I had to make different friends, and then afterwards we moved back. And when I moved back to that part of Utah, I was pretty much like in my adolescent phase, the onset of adolescence, right? And so now I've got to try to really fit in with kids, and um, there was some people that were around me that were different. There were different types of teenagers. They listened to different music, they dressed differently, and they acted differently. And one of them was a bully, and he was. It was weird because when we grew up, I knew him before, and like we were kind of kids that played together. But then later, when he grew up, he became different, and it just seemed like he didn't like my kind, and he let me know about it. He actually tried to bully me in the hallways in school one day, and because of the violence that was already in my house, when your dad's already um, beating you, you are pretty much in fight or flight. Like if anybody has a problem with me, we're gonna I'll protect myself, right? And so I remember this guy tried to bully me in school one day, and it was embarrassing, and it was in front of people. And so I told him, let's meet after school behind the church. And there was this church, that same church where we would go get high behind, where there was like an open field behind it where you could go. I figured if I went back there, we could have a nice wholehearted fight and get it all out rather than do it in the hallways in school and get in trouble and maybe get like, sent home for a couple of days. And so we did that. We did exactly that. We ended up going to behind this church. I ended up showing up there and first, and he didn't come yet. And then when he did end up showing up, he was. I mean, out of nowhere, he just pretty much he hit me so hard it knocked me out cold. And so I was on the ground, and this guy was stomping on my face. I had braces in my mouth. The braces got caught into my gums. It was brutal. I mean, it was really, really bad. And I mean, I didn't feel any of it because I was already knocked out off the first punch. So he went on to basically pulverize me. And the whole school was pretty much back there. They had all caught wind of this, and everybody saw it. Everyone saw this, right? And it was so scary because I remember when I came to and I opened my eyes, I everyone was looking down at me, and I guess some neighbor lady came over and she was trying to protect me, and she got me up to see if I was all right. And I was so embarrassed because I thought, oh my God, like I just pretty much was, this is so, like everybody saw this. Like everyone knows now that I'm lesser than. And I didn't want to deal with anyone. I remember just getting up and walking down this street. I was bludgeoned and beaten and staggering, actually, right? To the point where when I got to my house, I walked into my house and my mom and my sister were in the living room, and I didn't even want to look at them, especially my mom. She looked terrified. Like she was like, "What happened to you?" And I ran right by her, went to my room, and I cried my eyes out in my pillow. Just thinking like this is horrible. Like I don't even want to go to school anymore. And my dad got home and he was angry. My dad was angry. Like, why are you angry at me, Dad? And he said, because you should have really held your own. Like, you should protect yourself. And I can't believe that you let somebody do this to you. And so that hurt me and harmed me too, because now I don't want to go to school because I don't want to see people, and I don't want to be home because he's making me feel less than. And and I felt like I was punished because the next day, which was a weekend, he had me outside painting the side of the house. And I have these two big black eyes, and my resentments were already starting to brew, right? Like I was thinking, I can't stand that kid that bullied me and did this to me. I can't stand my father that somewhat like verbally bullies me and sometimes physically bullies me. And I wanted to just get out of right here, right now more than ever. And that's like where the addiction really started to formulate and grow and grow and grow. And so what happened next was I would beg my dad often, what can we do to move out of Utah? I hate this state. I don't want to live here. We would often go on vacation to California, usually in the winter when it would be really snowy in Utah. We would go to our cousin's house in Los Angeles. I loved when we would go there because um, like when you're in a cold, miserable state like Utah and you end up coming to California in the dead of winter and like there's no snow on the ground and there's sunshine and palm trees. It's almost like there was like a tropical effect, right? It was like so fun. We'd go to Hollywood, we would go to Disneyland, we would go to the beach, and I would beg him, like, what can we do to move to California? Let's move to LA. And so my dad one day came home when I was 15 years old and he said, guess what? I have good news. We're moving to Utah, to California. And like all my dreams were answered. And I thought, okay, what do we do? Like, let's start packing. Started packing. Within 2 weeks, we ended up moving to California. And what was really good about that was, and it was kind of a culture shock, is I walked up into my high school. I went to Costa Mesa High School at the time. And I looked around me and I thought, this is different. Like there are different types of people here. Like this is a whole different field. There's a lot of black people and brown people, and there was Asians, and there was even Persians, right, in my school. And I thought, like, this is really, really cool. And of course, like I was 15, almost going on 16, and it was that period in life, the high school era, right? So all the stuff we saw in the movies where people were at high school parties and things like that were actually starting to happen. And so I gravitated right towards people that were having fun. There was a Persian kid and there was an Indian kid, and these two guys were buddies, and like they made me their buddy, and so we just like started buddying around. And I remember even during that time, like I would get in trouble with my mom because I was starting to get high a lot. And she would really get on my case and say, like, this isn't what you're supposed to be doing, and you need to be staying sober. And I didn't know what sober meant, but I do remember, like, I was always seeking my mom's approval, and I always knew that my mom, I have to make mom happy, and I can't keep secrets. And so, like, I was doing my best to try to be honest and stop, but I would still hang out with those friends. So I was actually attempting sobriety and I don't talk about this much in my story when I speak in like 12-step meetings, but like I was actually attempting sobriety during that time without recovery behind it, right? And so by the time I was like, um, you know, 15 and a half, 16 years old, I remember I had a diary and I would write in my diary, today I have 5 days, today I have 10 days, today I have 100 days, right? And and then it just, I couldn't hold myself together anymore. I mean, I was hanging out with these people still. I'd still go to parties with them. Mom, I was staying sober, but then something happened where I was around a bunch of people that were getting high one night and drinking, and I felt like a square. I was like, why am I standing in the corner watching all these people have fun and I'm not having fun? And so I decided to partake, and I ended up getting high and drinking that night. and then it started to back up again. Like here I am, back in motion, doing what I was doing, and and then Omid's dad worked in the hotel industry, and he did cocaine because he worked long hours, and so he introduced me to cocaine. And the next thing you know, we were rocking it up and freebasing cocaine, which it's not normal for two 16-year-olds to be cracked out, but that's what was happening, right? And between that and then drinking on weekends and then smoking weed pretty much every day, I was a full-blown addict. And this was like a really hard thing to do and try to keep it under wraps without my family finding out. So again, the secretive life had taken form again, right? By the time I was 17 years old, I'd gotten a driver's license, and it was like a year late. But still, I was really happy to get my driver's license. My dad gave me his hand-me-down VW Volkswagen Bug. It was like this car that he used for a long time, but now it was my car. And for me, it was like a new car, and I was really excited to have it. And I was so excited. I remember one morning I hadn't done anything. I hadn't used any substance, but I remember I'd called all my friends and told everyone to be out in front of their houses because I'm going to pick all you guys up, and we're going to school in my car. My sister came with me along the way as I picked everybody up. I even picked up like this girl I was dating, and it had rained the night before, so the streets were very wet. And as we were headed to school, we were just high school kids having high school fun. I mean, it was like the laughter in the car, the music that was blaring. It was fun. We were just like giggling, laughing, all that stuff that high school kids do. The windows were rolled down. You could smell the fresh lemon trees in the air. And I remember as we're driving up the street, suddenly out of nowhere, like within 1 second, this 14-year-old kid darted out in the street on his bicycle right in front of my car, and I couldn't hit the brakes fast enough. And so right before the intersection, he hit the hood of my car on his bike and into the windshield. His body hit. The windshield shattered, and the car kept rolling and crashed into this minivan. And the kid's body was flung over the minivan headfirst into the ground. And that was like extremely traumatic, right? Like to get out of an accident like that and just to try to gather my thoughts. I remember thinking in one instance, did I just hit a human body? I got out of the car, and my head from the impact of the windshield had little broken pieces of glass, and like I could taste this blood trickling down into my mouth. And I remember looking at all of my friends in the car and everybody, and there was blood all over their faces. And I thought, oh my God. And then I realized like I did hit a human body, and I went and looked around the side of the minivan, and the kid was laying face down with blood gushing out the top of his head. And I thought, oh my God, I'm in trouble. I'm in trouble. And the police were called, and an ambulance came, and the ambulance whisked the kid off to the hospital, and the police took me down to the police station, and they asked me all kinds of questions. And then they ended up releasing me. And I wasn't under the influence, so they released me after they got all their questions answered and everything. And I went home. And I remember when I went home, I was in a lot of fear. Like I didn't know what to do, right? So we had caught wind through some people that the kid was on life support, the kid that I hit, and that the mom was contemplating for the next few days on what she should do, what decision she should make on determining the outcome of his life. And had she kept him alive, he probably would have never been the same because of the impact of his head hitting the asphalt. There was he would have been a vegetable, probably pretty much for the rest of his life. And so she decided to not keep him on life support anymore, and he ended up losing his life. And so now I have to carry the weight of that. On top of that, my entire school finds out about it. And again, I'm at a point in my life where there's this embarrassment that I carry. There's this guilt, this burden, this shame, and I don't know how to process that. And being 17 and already active in addiction and alcoholism, I it became an ultimate excuse to just use and drink in excess, so I didn't have to deal with this anymore. On top of that, I was still in my high school for a few days, but a lot was happening. The county newspaper was trying to come and question me and ask me questions about the accident. And then I remember not attending class a few times and then being called into the office, and the principal sat me down and said, maybe it's better if you just go to that other school, which is this continuation school, so that, people don't mess with you. There was a lot of students that were messing with me too, putting notes in my locker, telling me things that were disturbing and mean and not nice. And so I ended up just leaving the school and going to the other school. And the other school was across this creek, and nothing good happened in that school. Continuation schools are usually like that. They're for kids that are messing around, that are not achieving well in school, that are cutting class. And so now I'm amongst these types. And obviously, they're very, very deep into drug addiction and alcoholism. And so I remember showing up to the school, just with this attitude of being a rebel, getting into lots of trouble. I started having a lot of police interaction. I would have police often pick me up and put me in the back of their police car. I was under the influence most always. I was in handcuffs. I'd find my way into holding cells, jail cells as an adolescent. And the next thing you know, I found my way into a juvenile court. And I remember being in this juvenile court, and the judge called me to the stand and said, Mr. Alaghamandan, we don't see you fit to be on the streets. You're a complete menace to society. You have accumulated all these crimes over this period of time within a few months. And on top of that, you have a vehicular manslaughter charge without gross negligence riding over your head. Therefore, we're going to sentence you to juvenile hall. So they sent me to juvie. And I remember walking into juvenile hall and just thinking to myself, like, whoa, this is different. Like, this is different. And at first I saw someone that I knew from hanging out that was actually, he was a regular there, right? Like, he would always get locked up. He was my buddy. And I remember seeing him and thinking, like, okay, good, at least I have him here. But then the fear set in because there was various types of people in there that they were all adolescents, obviously, because it was juvie, but they were hardened criminals, some of them, or criminals in the making, right? And so they challenged me. And I remember having a complete meltdown in boys receiving, and I said things that made them worried, so they transferred me to this different unit. And this unit that they transferred me to was the psych unit, right? So I was put on suicide watch for a little while. I would sit in my cell and I would think and I'd wonder and I'd wonder, like, how did this happen to me? Like, how did I end up here? Why am I locked up in this cell? I can't look outside there was like this window type setting with a cage on it, so you could only see the light from outside, but you can't look outside. And it was in those moments that I would sit and just contemplate, like, God. And I thought, like, why, if there's such thing as a God, why would God do this to me? Why would God put me in this type of situation? I was somewhat of a normal kid not that long ago. So why here? Why am I caged up like an animal? And why would God take that poor kid's life away from him? He didn't even know what was coming to him. Blackout, dead, gone just like that. Like, I stopped believing in anything greater than myself. I thought, there's no such thing as God. I renounced God at a very young age. And during that time, I was also introduced to the 12-step world. There was somebody that would bring a panel into our unit and they would read out of the book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And he was this old man, and he was trying to carry a message. And so even though I was young, I was still hip, slick, and cool and not really ready to receive a message. A seed was planted within me, and it was a weak seed, but a seed nonetheless. And so the only reason I really wanted to go listen to him was because it got me out of my cell for 1 hour. And when you're locked up for 21 hours a day, you'll take any opportunity to get out. If they tell you go to church or whatever, right? Like, go walk the yard, all that stuff. And so, like, I would go in this room and this guy would read from the literature of Alcoholics Anonymous to me and to us. And wasn't ready to receive the message. I remember my mom and dad had already gone through a separation too, which really messed with me. Like, it did not sit well with me that we came to this country as a family unit, four of us, mom, dad, brother, sister, and now we are separated. And my mom was like my hero, and she was doing everything that she could to get her son out. She certainly didn't want me to be in there at all, right? So she was writing letters. She was having people in the neighborhood write letters. She was getting petitions signed from teachers, all of our neighbors, all of our friends and family, everybody. And finally, they ended up getting me out on good behavior. And now that mom and dad were separated, I ended up going to mom's house for a little while. And I was like, in the last few months of me being 17, I remember mom and I were good until we weren't good. Sometimes mom was overly strict, extremely codependent, but she was also a hard worker, working all day, every day. So I was somewhat of a latchkey child because she was never home. And by her never being home, I was doing things in her house that wasn't good, like getting high, right? Or partying with people and having them over. And so she would sometimes get on my case. And when she'd get on my case, I would tell her to leave me alone. And I was a very angry young man. I was punching holes in the drywall, hurting my fists, but there was a lot of anger I was carrying. And so I'd just say, well, then I'm going to leave your house. And I would go to my dad's house. And I would go across town to my dad's new place. And sometimes we were good until we weren't good. And then he would get on my case. And if he would get on my case, I'd say, I go to my mom's house. And so I was like back and forth between their houses up until the time I turned 18. And then one time when I was staying with my dad, he got on my case really, really bad and he got in my face.
Mm.
And, after all the anger and violence that I'd encountered with him throughout my adolescent period, now that I was 18, I was bigger, I was buffer, I could hold my own. And one day I got so angry with my dad that I ended up putting my hands on the man. And it scared him. It really scared him. And he remember, it scared him so bad that he sat me down the next day and said, listen, son, you're 18 now, and I've provided for you your whole life, and I'm not obligated to you anymore. You're of the age now where you're an adult and you can take care of yourself. I've decided I'm going to move back to Iran. And during that time, almost simultaneously, my mom moved to Santa Monica. So my dad left this apartment for me. He said, you can go out in the world, you can go work, and you can pay the rent and learn how to be a man in the world. I'll give you some money, and you can also go to school, you can go to college and try to get educated. So with dad leaving and mom moving, here I was, this 18-year-old kid, still wet behind the ears with hardly any home training, um, no guidance from any male figure, trying to make it in the world, and suffering and struggling with alcoholism and addiction. And so I tried to work in the workplace, two jobs, just to try to make ends meet and make the rent. And I couldn't hold jobs because I was always under the influence. And I even tried to go to college, was never able to pay attention in class because I was always high. And so I ended up withdrawing from all my classes. I dropped out of college, and I figured, if I'm doing these drugs, I've got to be able to afford these drugs, and I'm not working, so I'm not making money. So how can I get high and survive and pay the rent? And I got this bright idea to start selling drugs. And if I was to be selling the drugs, then I don't have to do anything. I can do all this from the comfort of my own home. And that's exactly what I did. And obviously, I was very influenced by the music I was listening to, because a lot of that gangster rap and things like that that was originating, and they would really like uptalk selling drugs, having these glamorous lives, nice cars, women, objectifying women, all that stuff, and that became my identity. And that's like pretty much like I liked that. I enjoyed that. I surrounded myself with people that were of that mindset. And so it was like a collective ego. We all basically saw things that way based off of the music, the lifestyle, the easy money, the women that would hang out with us, which I knew within myself, these are broken women. The types of women we were hanging out with were women that were working in nightclubs, bars, strip clubs. And so like I knew, I had enough sense to know like they're not well, but that's okay because they need me and I'm giving them things like substances to be able to make it in their lifestyles. And on top of that, like there was a lot of sex and things like that. And that was just like what it was about, right? And from the outside, most of my friends that would see me would think that Pej's got it going on. Like he's got it going on, extravagant lifestyle. Like this guy is the man, right? And so that was like nurturing and building my ego. But I remember like deep within the pit of my stomach, there was always this sense of impending doom. Like, what is wrong with me? Like, what is wrong with me? Like, why do I feel the way that I feel? And I had this God-sized hole within me. And I'm clear on the fact today that I was filling the void within with drugs and alcohol. And I was empty. I didn't know it was wrong. And also tucked in the back of my head was this guilt that that kid that lost his life when I was 17, I caused that. I should have been paying more attention, you know, and so I just kind of just carried on with this lifestyle all throughout my young adulthood. All my 20s consisted of partying, going to raves, clubs, all that. And on top of that, I even started a business. And the business was a clothing line, which then became many different items like surfboards, skateboards, snowboards, and all of our designs were based around drug using, right? Like they were actual logos that were like about drugs, glorifying drugs. And really like because I already liked that lifestyle, like it was cool and people bought our product and I was funding it all with drug sales, right? With the money that was coming into the business was from selling lots of drugs. And so again, the ego, getting nurtured. People want me for not just my drugs, but for my clothes and for my items and for all this. But the problem was is that my addiction was becoming more heavy. And by the time I was 30, I started losing things. I was creating wreckage for myself in my life. Um, I didn't know how to manage money. I didn't know how to run a business. I never went to business school. I was actually um, spending more than I was bringing in. And so I started losing things and people were backing away from me. Those business partners that were helping me were like, you're not well, because I started to get into more heavy drugs like heroin, opium, methamphetamine. Meth was the devil's dandruff. I mean, this stuff, it ruled me, right? It basically took over my life in a way to where it was a love-hate relationship. I depended on it for energy. I depended on it to try to get things done, to get things going, but it consumed me to the point where um, when I created that wreckage in my late 20s, I got for the first time I got evicted from an apartment. For the first time I got my car taken away from me, and that wasn't even like a repo. It was from a major drug dealer who I took his money and wasted his money in Las Vegas, and he came after me and basically took my money as collateral, right? And I wasn't going to get it back. So I didn't have a car, I didn't have a place to live, and I was this close to homelessness, but I did what a good Persian boy would do is go make his mom make feel sorry for him. And so she had this place that she had just purchased. It was a townhome, and she told me that I could move in with her. And so, but there was conditions. Some of the conditions were that I get a job, that I be 100% sober, and that I don't hang out with this ex-girlfriend of mine who was total trouble, right? And so I did get the job. And in her eyes, I got sober, but I didn't get sober, right? I would attempt to quit doing heavy drugs and just smoke weed and drink, but I couldn't stay sober that long anyway from the other stuff too. I still kept the same company of the same types of people that were using the heavy drugs and being around them. Again, I felt like an oddball and I started getting involved in drugs again and really heavy drugs, right? To the point where I was um, obtaining drugs from cartel members, people that were very dangerous, that were telling me, like, if you ever get arrested, we'll come after, if you rat us out, we'll come after you and your family. And so, like, I had to try to conduct a lifestyle out of my mom's house, acting like I'm sober, living a double life, a triple life, working in the workplace, secretly still seeing the girl that she told me to keep away from the house. Like, again, she worked a lot. She was never home, my mom. So, like, I would sneak the girl into the house or even had a secret place in the house where she would reside. And then it happened. And what happened was I was raided by the Orange County Methamphetamine Task Force. And it
Mhm.
wasn't the first raid I'd been involved in. Throughout my life, I was probably involved in about six different raids, two in my own homes, one in my mom's and one in my apartment once. And and the cops came and they got me and they put me in jail. And I remember it was really interesting that when I was a teenager, my mom told me one time while visiting me in juvenile hall, I come and visit you here because I know that you ending up here wasn't your fault. And but if you ever end up in places like this throughout your life because of a certain lifestyle, like drugs or things like that, don't call me. So now, fast forward 30 years old, I get my mom's house raided and the cops take me in. And I guess when she came home that day, she had seen that they had broke open the front door of the house and broke the lock off and came in, and the house was in shambles because they went through everything looking for the drugs. And apparently she called the morgue to see if I was dead. She had called she called around. She found out through the police that I'd been arrested. And the following Monday, when they had me handcuffed to all of the other inmates and brought me into the courtroom, she was sitting in the courtroom whispering, "Why didn't you call me? Why didn't you call me?" And I just looked at her and I was thinking, like, because you told me not to call you if I ever got in trouble for that, right? For something like this. And something like this happened. And so I was in jail, and she came with my aunt and with my sister, and they visited me. She was so angry. And I'm sitting behind the plexiglass with the little phone right there, and my mom wouldn't even talk to me. You could just see the anger in her face. And my aunt would take the phone, or my sister would, and they would relay messages from my mom of, "You did this and you did that, and here's the guilt trip again." And I'm just sitting there in tears, just like, God, I don't even know what's wrong with me. Like, I don't want to be in here. I'm so sorry. And I ended up getting out of there, and my mom, was trying to help get me help, but she wasn't going to allow me to come back to her house. So she took me to this house in Huntington Beach, California, and there was this man that was running the house, and his name was Siamak. And it was a sober living home. And I remember going there fresh out of jail, and I'm walking through this guy's house, and I see these people sleeping in their rooms and things like that, or just like living in the house, watching TV and stuff. And I was like, "Oh, this is a nice place. Yeah, right. This is cool." And then like the way the man talked to me, he was all I kept hearing is the word recovery coming out of his mouth. Can't compute. I don't understand what he doesn't speak my language. So I'm respectful. I'm nice. I told him this is a nice establishment you have here, but I'm not going to stay here. And my mom was upset, and I said, "Mom, let's go to the other place," because we had like a list of two or three places, and so we went to this other place, and it was an American man, and I was kind of calculated. I knew if I went there, it was going to be close to my girlfriend's house, and it was going to be close to like my dealer's house and all these things. I didn't know how I was going to continue to keep getting high because I knew I was facing some prison time. I was also some going to be tested and things like that. So I went to this other sober living, and I basically did time there, right? It was circumstantial. I'm only going to be here for a little while. I know how to win my mom back over. And so I only stayed there for a couple of months. I remember like my mom kept my car from me. I'd walk around the streets aimlessly thinking like, I know what to do. If I get a job, I can make mom happy again and I can work my way back into her house. And so that's exactly what I did. I worked my way back into her house, but I didn't get into recovery. I would go to meetings, 12-step meetings, and that's because the sober living I was in required that. So when I would go to the meetings, I would sit in the meeting like a potted plant and just observe. I didn't participate. I didn't identify as an addict or an alcoholic. I didn't even tell people my real name. I didn't want to. I didn't want to have, my ego was so big. I was like, I want nothing to do with these losers. I'm not thinking that the lifestyle I have makes me a loser. Like my mom's not even like in my 30s allowing me to come back to her house, but I did end up behaving just the right way and doing the right things to work my way back into her house, which that's what she did. And like during that time, I worked and acted good. I acted good. I was put on probation. I dodged a cannonball. She got me a really good attorney, a high power attorney, to not have to go to prison. And so by not going to prison, I just resided at her house and existed and secretly was using, even on probation. I was so clever in the way that I could use my drugs that while on probation, I would only use drugs one time a month. And that would be right after I'd go visit my probation officer in the morning on a Wednesday, once a month. And then I would use for an entire day. And for the rest of the month, I would white knuckle it, which means just existing but like staying sober but not doing the work, right? And then again, being as clever as I thought I was, the following month, a few days before I'd go see the probation officer, I would test myself, like urinalysis, test myself to make sure there was nothing in my system from the previous month. And then I would go again and do it all over again. And over a period of time, after getting off of probation, my addiction, they say it's a progressive illness, a progressive disease, took form. And it went from being a weekend thing to a daily thing to an hourly thing to a minute by minute thing, and it became all the heavy drugs all over again. And pretty much from the time I was 30 to 34 and a half,
Mhm.
my addiction was right back to where it always was. I attempted to go to art school because I was always an artist since I was a kid, right? I wanted to, my mom encouraged me to go to art school. She got me signed up to a really good school. It was the Art Institute back then. And I had big dreams. Like I really wanted to go do something with myself artistically, but unfortunately, because I was so deep in my addiction, I couldn't. I just couldn't do it. So I couldn't function in school. I got put on academic probation. It got to the point where I had one last chance to be able to remain in the school, and I screwed up the opportunity and was kicked out of that school for good. Like I was basically walked off the campus by the dean of students. She said, "You're just not fit to be in this school. You're not well. You need to get help." And so, um, the following year, between 34 and 35, a lot of bad things happened. I mean, a lot of car accidents. Mind you, I'm the same kid that crashed into somebody that lost their life years before, and now I am crashing into parked cars. I am um, driving under the influence all the time. I crashed into a guy's car that lived on our street that was actually a police officer, and I totaled his car. Um, so the wreckage was really starting to build up, and mom knew something was wrong with me. She just wasn't educated for all those years, and now she was becoming educated. And she talked to some people, and one of them would actually be Siamak. Like she had gotten in touch with him and another guy named Dr. Shamsian. And so they told her, until your son isn't ready to get help, we can't do anything for him. And she became armed with the facts about herself, the wrongdoings, the codependency. She started going to Al Anon and she started working their steps. And so what she did was basically she gave me an ultimatum. One day she met with me, sat me down, and said, "Listen, son, I have found some things out about you that I don't agree with." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And I was really good at like talking my way out of stuff with mom, but she basically had found my drugs. She had found the utensils I used to do the drugs, and she said, "You're either gonna go get help or you're gonna leave my house." And I told her I can figure it out on my own. I don't need to go get help.
Mhm.
Again, strong ego, grandiose, right? Egocentric. And so I tried to go do it on my own. And I had my car and I ended up living out of my car and I was a homeless man. And over a period of time, I would either stay in my car or stay at people's houses, lower companions, if you will. I was a lower companion too. And while staying at these people's houses, things just weren't working for me. I started getting into trouble, in the workplace. I tried to work somewhere. I got let go because I was totally high all the time. And finally, I couldn't do it anymore. I remember staying on someone's couch and attempting to detox to sober up, but I couldn't stay sober for the life of me. So then I called my mom. And this was a few months into homelessness. And I remember when I talked to her, she had the way she was talking was different. She had become educated, right? Like you could just tell the style of terminology, the things that she was saying to me. She told me I was dead to her. And I said, that is really ruthless to say something like that. What are they teaching you in those Al Anon classes? And she said, I haven't had my son since he was an adolescent. A monster took him away from me. I don't know what's become of you, but you're not alive to me. If you want help, you can call this number. It's a guy named Max. Otherwise, just please don't call me. And she had changed the locks on her doors. So I knew she meant business, right? So a few days went by and I ended up calling this gentleman named Max, and he told me that I could get help. And so he told me to go to this house on a Friday morning at 9 a.m., park my car out front and knock on the door. And so I did just that. And I remember going to this house. It was in Irvine, California. And I knocked on the door and slowly the door opened and I looked right into the eyes of that man named Siamak. And I recognized him and I knew him. I was like, I know you. He said, well, I don't know you. And I go, don't you remember me? And he said, no, I don't. And I go, didn't you have a house on Beach Boulevard 5 years ago, sober living? He said, yeah, I had the house. I said, well, I came to your house back then. He goes, I don't remember you. And I go, how do you not remember me? And he goes, because I remember the ones that stay. Would you like help? And I said, yes. He goes, well, Max told me you're going to be showing up today. So come on in. So we did this intake process and it was really cool. Like, well, it wasn't cool at first because I didn't know what kind of house I was going into. His house was much more structured and much more strict. And although he was a sweetheart of a gentleman of a man, he was strict. He was stern. Like he was no nonsense, right? And I didn't know that. He, I don't talk about this that much, but like he put me to work right away. Like my very first day, he had me like moving these Persian rugs around, and I'm like coming off a meth bender, thinking like this is what is it? But I was being a service. And he would send me to these Farsi speaking 12-step meetings and then to English speaking 12-step meetings. And the message was coming at me from different angles. And mind you, I didn't even know Farsi that well at that time. I like knew a little bit of Farsi, but like I'm in these meetings now where I'm hearing people carrying a message in Farsi, and then in these other meetings where they're carrying the message in English, and I'm kind of just grouping it all together in my mind and thinking, well, if this community and that community are all part of the same community and they're all getting sober, maybe there's something going on here. On top of that, I lied through my teeth because I was still formulating plans to get high, and I got called on it by Siamak in one of his process groups. And that was my first wake up call to, he would say, you're so inauthentic about your own inauthenticity. And I'm like, I have no idea what that means. What do you mean? And he goes, you want me to simplify it for you? I go, yeah, sure. He goes, you're so full of crap. You're full of you're so full of crap. You're full of crap about being full of crap. And I was like, oh, so that means like I buy my own lie and live in the lie, right? And it was a wake up call for me. And so I had a conversation with him in his office one night. I told him I want to open up to you because I don't feel good. Like I'm in rehab and I'm totally lying to myself. Like, what else? What can I do? And he goes, well, why don't you sit down here and tell me about yourself? And I go, what do you want me to tell you? He goes, tell me your life story. I go, how much time do you got? He goes, I'll give you 2 hours. So I sat for like 45 minutes and told him everything. How I had my heart broken by my sweetheart when I was young, how my dad was violent within the house, how I started experimenting with drugs, how this car accident happened that's been consuming me my whole life. And he said, okay, I have an idea. And I go, what's the idea? And he goes, we're going to do a psychodrama for you. And I'm like, what is that? And he said, you'll see. And during that time too, my mom wasn't talking to me. She wouldn't take my calls and she wouldn't visit me on Sundays when everybody else's families was visiting them. And that was just tearing me apart because I really wanted to see my mom. And so on this one night, he decided to have a family group. It was every Wednesday night, he would have these family groups where all of the clients would be there and all of their families would be there. And sure enough, my mom was invited by him to come there that night. So she came, and I didn't know what I was in for, but this was what was life changing and my turning point. He basically grabbed one of the other clients, their kid that was a 12-year-old, and had him lay on the ground and put a sheet, like a bed sheet, over his body. So all you saw was a body with a bed sheet over it. And he told me to walk around the room and talk about that day, the day of my car accident. I mean, it was he wanted me to break it down in detail, like what song was playing on the radio, if I remember, the smell in the air, which was the lemon trees that were coming through the car with the windows rolled down, the laughter within the car, all of it. And then he said, then what happened? And as I went through the motions, he told me to come and get on one knee and put my hand on top of this body. And I said, what is this? And he goes, this is the body of the kid that you hit on the bike. And I said, well, oh my God, this is heavy. He said, what was the kid's name? And I said, his name was David. He goes, tell David how you feel about him losing his life. And I said, I'm so sorry that you lost your life. I never intended for that to happen. I wish that I could go back and erase it all and start over. And he said, okay, now tell him about your life. And I said, my life? I don't have a life. I don't know what having a life is like. I've never had a real life. He said, okay, so what do you want to do, Pej? I go, I don't know. He said, do you want to make a commitment? I said, yeah, I want to make a commitment. He said, what do you want to commit to? And suddenly it just flowed out of my mouth. And I don't know why this came out. Maybe it was because I was engulfed around recovery for the last few weeks. But suddenly I just said, I want to help every single addict and alcoholic of every age, race, creed, and color, one day at a time for the rest of my life. And he looked at me and he said, you mean that? And I said, I do mean it. And I looked over at my mom. The whole room was in tears. I mean, there was so much crying going on in this room that I looked at my mom and the tears were pouring down her face and her face was shaking. And I thought in that moment, like, I got to do this. Like, I have to do this. That means that I have to erase these old ideas of I can still smoke weed or drink one day out of my head and get honest with myself and do like be true to my word, or I will be a loser for the rest of my life. And I kid you not, I went to bed that night in the rehab and I woke up the next morning and I felt like 1,000 pounds was lifted off my back. I thought, this is what I've been waiting for this whole time, to be able to process this stuff and work through it. Everything I've been carrying all this time feels like it's lifted off my shoulders and now I can live freely. But there was work to be done, a lot of work. And so instead of pussyfooting and messing around and not getting a sponsor, I ended up getting a sponsor in the 12-step world. And between working the 12 steps with the sponsor and then being in the clinical setting and having a psychologist come in once a week that was helping me process therapeutically, and having a guy like Siamak conducting these groups, everything from family groups to core groups to educational groups, I was just receiving information, which was then putting me in a position to change my life completely. And Siamak was really big on, he would say, inside job before the outside job, but make sure that you get a get well job once you are good enough to get one where you're not going to ruin the opportunity. So I started getting a job just like working. I worked at a grocery store and it was really cool and I really loved it and that was good. But he encouraged me to go to school. And I was like, see, I'm like, I don't do good in school. You don't understand. Like, I ruined my opportunity in Art Institute. I never got good grades in high school. And he said, Pejman, you were always on drugs in those places, weren't you? And I said, yes. He goes, of course you can't perform well in school when you're under the influence. Have you ever tried going to school completely sober? I said, no. He goes, well, I encourage you to do it strongly because when you sit in these groups, you give great feedback, but you have no empathy. I'm like, I don't think I know what that word even means. And he said, look it up. You lack in that. The way that you give feedback, it's not what you're saying, it's how you're saying it. You go for the throat. And maybe that's your upbringing and that's maybe just who you are. And if you were able to go to school, you could actually deliver your message better. And I said, oh, okay. So I ended up taking his direction. And you know, at first there was a lot of fear. I went and took a few classes, an ethics class. I did drug and alcohol studies, right? So I wanted to become now suddenly an addictions counselor. And so I would go to class and I would sit and I was like taking it all in a sober state of mind. And I actually started having a deep respect for all of our teachers and professors. I was like, this is great. Like, I'm getting educated on pharmacology, like the drugs and why I use them and how each one of them affects you. I'm getting educated on substance abuse prevention. I'm getting educated on awareness, like how to, you know, spread awareness on drug addiction and then group facilitation. That class was everything to me because now what Siamak was talking about before was I was able to learn it here and understand that I have to meet people where they're at and I have to be able to manage a group without personalizing things, even if other people aren't well, right? And that's what happened. And it's like everything started to work out perfectly. I worked my way out of working in the grocery store after 6.5 years, which was my get well job, and helping me be self-supporting by my own contributions and living on my own. But I decided to take the next step up, and that was to work in treatment. So I started working in adolescent treatment. And it was beautiful doing that because there was these young kids around that were under the age of 18 that reminded me of myself a lot. And it was like there was power struggles and I got to learn a lot about myself. I was warned by the people that I worked with, like, you cannot personalize anything that these kids are doing. These are teenagers. And I saw drug addiction in within these kids that I'd never even encountered. Kids that were smoking pills and things like that. I was like, what? You smoke pills? This is crazy. This is sad. It's scary. And then the Department of Justice took me out of that position because they said, you used to sell meth and you're not allowed to be working with adolescents. So I started fighting that against the Department of Justice. And by doing, I wanted to prove myself to them. And so I had Dr. Shamsian and I had Siamak and I had my family and I had people from the community come and represent me in court for the Department of Justice, which I beat that case, and I was put on a probationary period to go back to adolescent treatment and work there. But in that time, I had gotten a job in adult treatment. So I started working in treatment centers that was addressing co-occurring disorders, dual diagnosis, mental health, addiction, alcoholism. And I had gotten a job at this place where this lady, Fauzier Nixad, she was a therapist there. Her and another lady, Michelle, they put me in a position to run 5 groups a week. And one of them was self-discovery. Another one was quest for virtue. Another one was the 4 agreements. And then there was 2 other 12-step groups. And this just became my bread and butter. I was loving it. I was loving it. I would run these groups, and there was so many different types of people. There was people that had severe manic depression. There was people that had anxiety disorders. There was people that had heroin addiction, cocaine addiction, meth addiction. I qualified for all of this because I've experienced all of that, so that I could sit here and interact with these people. And then I started working my way into the treatment world. And when I was working in treatment, I became a case manager, and then a program manager, and a program director. And over a period of time, I opened some places in Los Angeles with Dr. Shamsian. And um, after a while, I became an interventionist. I became a coach, a sober coach, a recovery coach, a sober companion, a life coach. I went to school to like become certified and do these things. And Spirit of the Universe put people in my life that became some of my greatest teachers and mentors. It started with Siamak. It was my first sponsor, Amir, who I'm actually in his house right now in Los Angeles. Um, and then it became people like Earl Hightower, that was an interventionist extraordinaire that taught me interventions as a professional. And there was another gentleman named Mark Lydiard, that was actually a coach, and he taught me coaching like no other. And so I've been a coach since 2014 in some capacity constantly. I've always got clients. I'm always coaching. Coach them everything from recovery to alcoholism, how to overcome these addictions, and then on top of that, how to live happy and sober in the world, and a lot of life coaching. And in that time, I've opened several houses in Los Angeles, in Orange County. At this time, I have a very exciting life. I never a dull moment. My houses are, they run like a well-oiled machine. I have a women's house and a men's house, and all the people are in recovery. And the houses are modeled after the house that I got sober in, which would be Siamak's house. All the same requirements, and then some things that I've added to. Siamak had his model and his style, and I had mine. God bless his soul. He passed away a couple of years ago. I watched him on his deathbed, and I remember holding his hand in his last moments, gasping air through a machine, and hearing his, I was so scared. I asked the nurse, can I hold his hand? And she said yes. And I remember holding his hand and hearing his voice in my head saying, we die and we die sober. I remember thinking that's what he used to say. The goal is that when we die sober. And in the same year, coincidentally, Dr. Shamsian passed away also. And so what has happened over these last, obviously, 18, almost 18 years in June, is that I have a lot of people that depend on me to help. The Iranian community is always calling me. I have a lot of Persians in our house. Um, and so I try to help them. And I do a lot of what Siamak did and a lot of what I have learned over the years from other teachers. And as an interventionist, I have a YouTube channel. I'm on social media. I'm an influencer. TikTok is definitely a place where during pandemic I was able to build my brand and build my name, and I educate. I'm constantly making shorts and long form videos that are educating about various types of addictions. Fentanyl is a huge craze. I've seen people overdosing right in front of me. I've had a lot of people that I've known and worked with and tried to help that have died from fentanyl addiction. Um, and I educate everything from marijuana to carts to LSD to psychedelics to methamphetamine to cocaine, all of it, because I've pretty much become an expert in this field. So like I can speak on this stuff. And I'm here to try to lift people's spirits and have them break from the collective ego and become their own individual human being and rise above and find their true essence within. As a matter of fact, my men's house is named the Essence House. And I always tell the guys, Your essence is your purest form in your soul. And that's what you want to seek. Anything more than that is going to just lead you on the wrong path. And the women's house is called Limitless Journey. It speaks for itself. Life is a limitless journey if you get on this path. And I see miracles every day. These people that come to our houses that work on themselves and truly embrace recovery get these big, beautiful lives. And I see it. And of course, you get a lot of people that come and go. You get a lot of people that come and go and come back and try again. And some of them go and some of them stay. Right. And so through my online stuff, people also hire me as an interventionist. And when I say never a dull moment in Pej's life, I'm called upon by people all across America to go to their respective hometowns and try to help their loved ones. Some of them live in mansions and some of them live in tents on the streets. And so like I go to some of the most sordid spots, but I'm a free man. So I'm not tempted along the way to go get high because I might run into someone that's getting high. I'm different now. I have a purpose. As a matter of fact, I've had three podcasts. One was called um, Sober Grind. The other one is called Pej's Recovery Corner, and we're launching another one in 2 weeks called Primary Purpose with Pej. And my primary purpose is to help any addict, any alcoholic, anybody with mental health find their path. I've got people in my house that have extreme schizoaffective schizophrenia, that talk to themselves, that hit themselves, that we try to stabilize and get and normalize and get them to actually be grounded. Some of it is drug induced and some of it is actually natural. It could have been from a predisposition that just intensified, and some of them don't want to get help. But my goal and my purpose is to try to help anybody that's suffering. Doesn't have to be an addict, alcoholic, or a person with mental health. It can just be a human that's depressed or sad or anxiety ridden. And personally, God is in my life. God, I came into sobriety looking for a God that was never lost. I was lost. So I think I've said a lot here. I don't know if you want to ask me some questions moving forward.
Yes, well, I love your story because it's a true story of redemption. Just beginning of your story, how how you started and then where you are now, it just shows how God can take our pain and make us like a leader to help others. So that's what I love about your story because a lot of people lose hope, they think I've had this trauma or I have this dark thing happen to me, I'm never going to come back. So I wanted to ask you, like you said, the work was required, right? Like you said, there was work to be done. Once you got to Mac's house, there was work to be done. He did that psychodrama with you. But could you kind of tell us a little bit about what is the work that it takes to truly be able to not need alcohol and all these different things? Because so many people in America drink alcohol. They think it's normal, for example, right? So could you talk to us a little about the work it takes? Like what exactly does that look like for people that really are ready to change their lives?
Well, I mean, when it comes to addiction or alcoholism, if somebody is drinking casually or leisurely, like they can go out and have a few drinks and they're good, they probably don't have a problem with alcohol because they just do it here and there. But when a person is drinking regularly, there's probably something wrong there. There's something going on there. There are people that drink because they love the effect that's produced by alcohol, right? Um, there's people that abuse alcohol because they're probably numbing something. Everybody has a story. In the line of work that I'm in, any addict or alcoholic that comes into my path, I try to learn them. I want to ask about them. I want to know their history. And usually when they start talking to me, I realize there's trauma. There's people that are carrying trauma. They trauma dump. They trauma bond, right? There's so many different types of trauma. And so when I talk about the work, like for me, what worked and the work that I had to do was therapeutically and clinically, I needed to work through my deep rooted stuff. The trauma I carried, I didn't encounter any type of sexual trauma myself, but I see lots of people that there's been a lot of things that have happened to them, right? I won't go too deep into it, but when I hear what's happened to them, I put myself in their little mindset of when it was happening, perhaps while they were growing up, and thinking, well, of course, this is something that you wanted to keep secret to yourself because it's embarrassing or you think you're going to get in trouble or this and that. What would they do? They'll resort to using drugs and alcohol. So they got to work through that stuff. And the good work that they do through it later puts them in a position to be able to help somebody else that's where it's relatable and maybe be of service to them, right? So work through your stuff therapeutically, but also work through your stuff spiritually. A lot of people that have addiction problems or alcohol problems are using that stuff to lift their spirits, but in reality, numb their trauma. And so when they're lifting their spirits, the goal is to be able to learn how to lift your spirits minus substance. So again, when it comes to when I say spiritual work that needs to be done, tap into spirit. I believe that any human being that's dependent on a substance to try to lift their spirits is actually nurturing their own ego. And when they're nurturing their ego, that's going to hold them back and block them from any type of greater source. We can call it God, we can name it different things, but really it's the spirit of the universe. How are you going to tap into the spirit of the universe when you're blocked because you're holding yourself back by using something, even if it's just casually using things? You're using something to make you feel good. What are you really not working through, right? And that's why lots of people go into doctor like a psychologist's office and say, I don't know what's wrong with me. I don't know what's wrong with me. It's because you're probably carrying a lot of pain, trauma, grief, sadness, inadequacies, turmoil, certain upbringings. We have this term that people use a lot of times these days called borderline personality disorder. And if you really like um, dissect it and understand how it originates, where it comes from, you'll realize it's a certain upbringing within that person's life that's put that person in this position where they can't process. So their trauma comes out in different ways, sometimes by acting out sexually, sometimes by saying things, doing things, um, suicide attempts, things like that. All of these different things happen because that person's carrying so much pain and trauma that they don't know how to process. So when it comes to working on yourself, you got to work through your stuff. And that's what worked for me. And listen, it's an ongoing thing. It's not like it just goes away. Throughout my almost 18 years of being sober, there's a lot of times when I can fly off the handle or something will come out of me where if I really become conscious of my actions and behavior, I'll stop and think that's how dad used to talk to me, and I've become a carbon copy of dad in that moment when I fly off the handle. Why wouldn't I be able to catch it before it comes out of my mouth and say it with more respect and dignity rather than just be egocentric and go for the throat yet one more time?
Yeah, that takes so much self-awareness to be able to see how we picked up things from our caregivers, right? And we all have that. And I love that you're humble and you're continuing to work on yourself. And really, there is no end. Like we always need mentors to kind of point out our stuff, right? And that's why I love my mentors. They tell me like, you got to work on this, you got to work on this. I think the point where we think we're cooked, then that's like a very dangerous place to be for any of us, right?
Yes. Yep.
And I was gonna ask you, so yeah, like for me, like I feel like alcohol is one of the most dangerous substances. Like to me, casual drinking is a problem because DUIs, people getting hit, like the whole world, in my opinion, if there was no alcohol would be better. And I've never seen someone drink alcohol that didn't have like deep sadness inside of them. And that's why I like to talk about it because like they sell alcohol everywhere, they don't sell meth everywhere, they don't even sell weed everywhere, but every restaurant has alcohol and people are constantly drinking. So I'm like a space for like zero alcohol in the world. But I wanted to ask you also this thing. So how do you stay hopeful while working to help people who are not open to help? Like you said, like a lot of people come to your house, right? But not all of them stay. Same with me. Like I have clients that come and they want to do the work and I see them become amazing. And then there's some people that are just very resistant or how do you stay hopeful? Because you're a very positive, hopeful person. So how do you maintain that?
I stay hopeful because if I was as messed up as I was and everything I've described, and I just said so many things, there were so many times and chances I had throughout my life, chances and choices to make a difference, but I kept on feeding the ego, feeding the disease of addiction, feeding the alcoholism. If I was able to finally have a glimmer of hope or somebody, there was a period of time in the beginning of my recovery where enough people said enough things to where my brain could capture it, but my heart could capture it even better. and then make a decision to change. If I can do it, anyone can do it. I have seen people straight off the streets of Skid Row that were living in a tent that hadn't showered in 6 months come and change their lives completely. In the following years, see the person taking a 1 year chip in a 12-step meeting in a three-piece suit, all cleaned up and all nice. That gives me hope. We've got to have hope. I don't think that God puts us humans on earth to suffer. I do believe that anyone that comes in the path of recovery is receiving messages. So it's my duty to continue to give people hope through my message. Will all of them get better? No. When I hear of people overdosing on fentanyl and dying or being hospitalized a few times, but continuing to keep using, I realize that that person has already received the message plenty of times and has the ability to make the right choice. But unfortunately, they're still dancing with the devil. They're still playing with their ego. And so they're making bad choices still because it's a selfish and self-centered way of being. It's just who they are. And maybe it's because they don't want to uncover, discover, and discard. Maybe they don't want to actually work through the trauma. Maybe they're carrying that much pain and they think, I'd rather just die and I'll do something that'll kill me and I'll feel good in the process of dying. I don't think a lot of them even actually think they're going to die. I think they're an exception. They think they're an exception to the rule or they can control it. But sadly, they're playing with fire. And when you play with fire, you will get burnt. So my hope is only there because I think in Farsi we say jarageh, like there's going to be something that's going to give you a chance to wake up. It's your choice to actually do it. And because I've seen so many people succeed, I'm not going to sit here and say a small percentage don't make it. I'm going to sit here and say 100% can make it. So my hope is to try to get through to as many of them as I can in hopes of them making it. And I'll say it just like I'm saying it right now. Believe in yourself. We need you. Just the same way that Amir, who's right here, put his hand on my shoulder once and said, we need you. And for once, I felt like I was needed for something in my life outside of the drugs and alcohol I was providing to people. I'm needed by people for the better good, to be able to be an inspiration, be able to be effective and helpful in their lives. So why not? It's all about empowering people, finding your essence, finding your truest self, and being able to rise above and do what I also think that God gives everybody certain abilities. Like some people have stronger abilities to do more in their lives. And I don't mean physical or financial. I mean the way that people can process or do things in their lives. I've seen people that have been completely shot out to the point where you think they're beyond human aid, they'll never make it, but they turn their lives around and they do their best in their lives to the best of their ability. I have a friend that was illiterate, didn't even know how to read, and came into the path of recovery and learned how to read through the literature, and now he's writing a book. He went to school to learn psychology. He's like, this is a person that was illiterate at the age of 36, and now he's writing a book. So certain abilities, it's up to us to be able to tap into our true essence and move, as Siamak used to say, you can move mountains. And when I would hear that, I thought, powerful statement. I'm ready to move mountains. I'll chisel them piece by piece until I can move them mountains. And that, so I have a lot of hope for humanity. I don't think we live in a bad world. There's a lot of worldly things that make it appear like it's not a good world, but it's not a bad world. It's a beautiful world, and we are divine human beings that have the ability to really make good choices for ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. So well said. I love that. And you said earlier, you said like when you were younger, you didn't necessarily believe in God because God is not something that we can necessarily touch, right? Like you were little, you said I
Right.
had a hole, the big hole that I was trying to fill with the drugs, with the girls, with the whatever, with the admiration, whatever. But now when you look back, as you tell your story, can you see how God was trying to reach you, like through that man coming to juvie and then through Siamak and all these,
Always.
he was trying.
God was sending the messengers. Always. And here's the thing, even though I said it, I have said that I didn't believe in God, but really what I said is I renounced God at a young age because I was mad that God put me in a position and put that kid in a position by taking him out of the game and taking his life from him. Deep down inside, we even say it in some 12-step literature, deep down within every man, woman, and child, the fundamental idea of God is there. So like really, I was always a seeker, and really, like growing up in Utah in a Muslim household around Mormons, everybody had their different versions of God, whether it was a Jesus God or an Allah God or all this stuff. But really, the truth of the matter is I could not believe in God along the path and the journey, because anytime I was in a desperate situation, especially when I would get incarcerated, you be locked up, you're going to start seeking for something to get you out of here. Why is it that I sought God or higher power or anything that can get me out of this mess in times of desperation?
Mm. It was like a part of you knew that it was real.
I always knew it was there. I always knew it. I
Exactly.
just was scared to turn to it because I didn't feel like I lived a lifestyle that was consisted of guilt and shame, because that's the type of environment I was raised in. Us Persians,
Mhm.
that's, it's always your fault, or you get talked down, the blame game, the shame game. And right now, the type of person I am in my life is I don't subscribe to the blame game and the shame game. Shaming is not going to help anybody, and blaming is not going to help anybody. But if you empower people, you give them the opportunity to believe in themselves, and that's where God resides, is within themselves.
I love that. And I love that you're starting a new podcast to teach people about their purpose. Because, yeah, once people get sober, then it's like, okay, well, what am I going to do? But it's like, okay, here's all the gifts you're given, and you're going to educate them about that. So, because we need an
Absolutely.
army of people to help the world right now, and if each of us do our own part, then a lot of people in the world can be saved and healed and then
Yeah.
be part of God's army. So I wanted to ask this other question. So how do you manage your thoughts and emotions now that, that are unpleasant now? Because, before, obviously substances are different things, but now how do you manage it? Like if you're sad or God forbid somebody you love dies, or if you get angry or something happens, how do you manage your emotions that are uncomfortable?
Well, I try to start my day off every single day. I don't even try, I do, right? When I wake up in the top of the morning, I have to plug into source immediately. Instead of being in my head or carrying the weight of the world, or letting my fears consume me and overtake me, I ask God to guide me in my thinking and my actions. I set intentions immediately, and I make sure that they're planted within God's plan.
Mhm.
So, everything is an experience. There are things that can make me sad, most certainly and most definitely, right? A breakup, let's say, for example, or job loss or financial insecurity. These things can definitely depress a person. But if I know that I have a relationship with God and God is my driving force, then it's easier to manage, because God's in charge. I'm living in God's world. I can't live in Pej's world. If I live in Pej's world and it's what Pej wants for Pej's selfish purposes, then I'm ego driven, and the ego does never goes away, and the ego has so many layers. So as long as I stay God inspired and in God's will, then I don't have to really have a hard time managing. My days are really good. Like I go throughout my day in really good spirits. No, it's all a journey. Everywhere I go, everything I see God in everything and everybody. I go to meetings and I hear people share, and I hear God speaking through them. You know, there's people I dislike, and I have to stop disliking them, because that's God's handiwork. That God wants them to be the way that they are, as they are right now, right? Like that's, who am I to try to play God? So I manage my emotions pretty well, but when I can't manage, then it's that trauma that's unresolved that might be festering against my consent without me even noticing it, because I'm not conscious to it, because I'm not in a God conscious state. I've got to tap into God every day and remain in the God conscious state all throughout my day. So that means praying or meditating doesn't just have to happen in the top of the morning. I can pray in my shower. I can pray in my car ride. God is always right here with me, right within.
Absolutely. So well said. And I want to just also point out what you said about your mom. You said she went to Al-Anon and she changed. Because sometimes we think just putting love onto something is going to fix a problem. But in her case, it was almost like tough love. So it's kind of like she had to shift, turn her energy away from you. So then you finally had to change to kind of like earn her love back, earn her respect back.
Yeah.
I'm just
Well, I never believed in the term unconditional love. I think David Icke said, isn't it sad that and then this isn't word for word verbatim, but isn't it sad that the meaning of love has to be so commercialized that we have to attach the word unconditional to it. The way my mom loved me when I wasn't well was with conditions, most definitely. It wasn't unconditional, it was with conditions. Like, you want to live that lifestyle? I'm going to love you from a distance, but I cannot stand here and watch you deteriorate and ruin yourself. So, yeah, she did the work. And by doing the work, and yes, it was tough love. It was the type of tough love I needed. Some people don't believe in tough love, they think it's not going to help their kid. But the reality of it is, my mom wasn't doing that to save me. My mom was doing that to save her.
Yes.
She needed to stop being addicted to me and living for me and start addressing her own issues, which then placed me in a position of having to turn it around and work on me. If I wanted a place in my mom's life, I need a change. And so she worked her program, I worked my program, and it brought us together in unison, equally on a balanced scale.
I love that because that's so important. So often people will come to us, right? And they'll be like, fix my kid or fix my partner. And it's like, well, what about you? Like, you're the other 50% of the equation. It's like they don't want to look at themselves.
Welcome to my world.
Yeah, so it's just your world. Like last night, in your group, you run these amazing groups on Wednesday nights for everybody that's interested. Reach out to Pej about those. But yeah, it's like you hear kind of like all the blame is generally placed on the addict because they're the one that looks like they're the problem.
Yes.
But, like you said, with your childhood, your dad was, going through his own pain and his anger was being placed on you. And then you were going to school and that kid was putting anger. So it was a lot of other people's stuff that was creating the root of this addiction. It was all this pain of other people being projected and then our own pain. So
Yes.
yeah, I think that's so important that people realize the family's part, their partner's part, because then relationship can become these powerful spiritual situations. Like in a family, if mom is getting help and the son and the daughter, then the conversations around the dinner table are so much more pure and so much more beautiful, right?
Yep.
So, and just wanted to say, like, so how have your friendships changed now that you're sober? Because, friends back then were wanting you for like the good stuff, right? Like the drugs and the clothes and the girls or whatever. But now you probably have true friends in your life. So could you share with us how your friendships are different now that you're sober?
Yeah, I mean, even though I'm a really outgoing person that's a major extrovert and I have a lot of friends in my life, I only have a few close friends, and that's all I need. And the friendships that I have are people that are like-minded and they're sober. And I mean, I have some friends that do things, but they're not my closest friends. They're genuine. They're people that are real. They care about my well-being. They're not afraid to tell me the truth, even if it hurts my feelings, and vice versa. I have great friends. We care about each other. It's like they're not using me. They're not taking advantage of me. I'm not taking advantage of them. So my friendships they're real. They're what real friendship consists of.
Exactly. So the more you start to love yourself, now you have people around you that love you as well, and you guys match that love. I know for me, like it's really hard for me to be friends with people that drink alcohol. Like it's like, 'cause it always ends up something ends up coming out, one way or another. So
Yes.
love that. And anything else that you want to share as a takeaway message for the people watching? You shared such a wonderful story. I'm so excited to post this.
I feel
Bye.
like I've said too much. No, I think I've shared everything. I love that I was able to be on here today and just speak my truth. And I think people should just believe in themselves. And I just want to keep inspiring people in the world to find their true essence.
Thank you. Wonderful. Well, thank you again for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on. I care about you deeply. You're my sister, my spiritual sister.
Yes, I'm so blessed that I met you through CMAC. He was an angel in all of our lives and brought us all together. So I'm very grateful for that. And thank you so much, Pejman. I hope
Thank
you have
you.
a beautiful day in LA with your sponsor. Bye.
Thank you.